The morning my daughter-in-law Madison told me I smelled like old people, I was standing in my own kitchen, wearing my favorite navy cardigan, making scrambled eggs for my grandson Tyler. The words hit me like a surprise mortar round. Unexpected, devastating, and impossible to unsee once the damage was done. I'm Eleanor Walsh, 72 years old, retired Marine Corps colonel with 30 years of service to my country. I've survived 3 combat deployments, lost more brothers and sisters, in arms than I care to count, and somehow made it home to build a life in Charleston, South Carolina. But in that moment, standing in my sunlit kitchen with the smell of fresh coffee and bacon in the air, I felt smaller than I had in decades. "Eleanor, is that you?" Madison had called from the hallway, her designer heels clicking against my hardwood floors. She appeared in the doorway, all blonde highlights and expensive athleisure wear, her nose slightly wrinkled. God, what is that smell? It's like old people. You know what I mean? That musty medicine cabinet smell? Tyler, all of 7 years, old with his father's green eyes and my late husband's stubborn chin, looked up from his coloring page. "Grandma Eleanor doesn't smell bad, Mommy." "Of course she doesn't, sweetheart," Madison said, her voice dripping with the kind of sweetness that never quite reaches the eyes. "It's just the house. We should really think about getting you one of those air freshener systems, Eleanor. Maybe something from Williams-Sonoma? I could pick one up for you." The thing about being a Marine is that you learn to read situations quickly. You learn to assess threats, identify weak points, and calculate your response in split seconds. What I saw in Madison's eyes that morning wasn't concern. It was disgust barely masked by politeness. It was the look of someone who had already written you off, who was just going through the motions of civility. I'd been funding my son David's business since he graduated from the University of South Carolina 5 years ago. Coastal Dreams Realty had grown from a one-man operation to a thriving agency with 12 agents and 2 office locations. Every month, I transferred $15,000 from my military pension and investments to keep his dream afloat. Madison knew this. She drove the Mercedes I helped them buy, lived in the 4-bedroom colonial I co-signed for, and wore the jewelry David bought with bonuses from properties I'd helped him close by lending my veteran connections to the business. "The eggs are ready, Tyler," I said, keeping my voice steady. Years of commanding Marines had taught me to control my reactions, even when my heart was racing. "Why don't you wash your hands?" As Tyler scampered off to the bathroom, Madison leaned against my counter, examining her manicured nails. "David's running late from his morning jog. Traffic from the new development is insane. We really need to discuss selling this house, Eleanor. The neighborhood's changing, property values are through the roof, and honestly," she gestured vaguely around my kitchen, "this place is starting to feel dated. We could help you find something nice in one of those senior communities. You know, with people your own age." The audacity struck me like a physical blow. This was the house my husband James and I had bought when we returned from our final deployment in Afghanistan. We'd spent weekends ripping up old carpets, installing new fixtures, planting the oak tree that now shaded the entire backyard. James had died of cancer 3 years ago, right here in this house, and every corner held memories of our 40-year marriage. "I'm quite comfortable here," I managed. Madison's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows raising. "Oh, good. David just pulled in. Finally." She straightened her yoga pants and checked her reflection in my kitchen window. "Remember, we're going to look at that new warehouse space this afternoon. The one downtown? David thinks it's perfect for expanding the business. We'll need to move quickly on it. Apparently, there's another buyer interested." I knew about the warehouse. David had mentioned it over Sunday dinner 3 weeks ago, his eyes bright with excitement as he talked about doubling his office space, hiring more agents, maybe even opening a commercial real estate division. It was ambitious, expensive, and exactly the kind of leap that would require significant capital. The kind of capital that came from military pensions and careful investments accumulated over a lifetime of service. The front door opened, and David's voice echoed through the house. "Mom? Madison? Tyler? Where is everyone?" "In the kitchen, honey," Madison called back, her tone shifting to that sing-song sweetness she used with her husband. "Your mom's making breakfast for Tyler." David appeared, sweaty from his run, wearing the Semper Fi t-shirt I'd given him years ago. He was the spitting image of his father. Same broad shoulders, same slow smile, same way of running his hand through his hair when he was thinking. But where James had been direct and honest, David had learned to smooth edges, to work rooms, to get what he needed without confrontation. It had made him an excellent real estate agent. "Morning, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek. "Morning, buddy," he added as Tyler reappeared, hands dripping with water. "Did you wash with soap?" "Yes, Daddy. Grandma Eleanor made eggs." "She makes the best eggs," David agreed, grabbing a piece of bacon from the platter I'd set on the counter. He glanced at his wife. "Everything okay? You look tense." Madison's laugh was light, dismissive. "Just talking about air fresheners. Your Mom's house has that old person smell, you know?" "Nothing personal, Eleanor. It's just a fact of aging." David's eyes flicked to me, then back to his wife. Something shifted in his expression, so subtle I might have missed it if I hadn't spent decades reading faces under pressure. "I've never noticed any smell, Madison." "Well, you're used to it. But think about when we have clients over. First impressions matter in real estate. We can't have them walking into a house that smells like a nursing home." The words hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. I felt my military bearing kick in, spine straight, shoulders back, face neutral. But inside, something was breaking. Not the insult itself, but the casual cruelty of it. The way she spoke as if I wasn't standing right there. As if my feelings were as irrelevant as the outdated wallpaper she'd been trying to convince David to change. "I should get these eggs to Tyler before they get cold," I said. "Of course," David replied, but he was already turning to Madison, asking about her morning yoga class, about dinner plans, about anything except what had just happened. As I served breakfast to my grandson, watching him carefully cut his eggs into perfect little squares just like his grandfather used to, I made a decision. The smell of old people. The dated house. The suggestion that I belonged in a senior community with people my own age. These weren't just thoughtless comments from a daughter-in-law who had never learned proper manners. They were symptoms of something deeper, something I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. I thought about the warehouse downtown, about David's expansion plans, about the $15,000 that would be automatically transferred from my account tomorrow morning. I thought about all the ways money changes relationships, how it can blind you to the truth until someone finally says exactly what they think of you in your own kitchen. The Marines had taught me many things, but perhaps the most important was this: when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Madison was still talking, her voice bright and cheerful as she discussed her afternoon plans, when I quietly excused myself and headed to my study. I had some phone calls to make. The mahogany desk in my study had been James's command center during his retirement. Military. Citations lined the walls, bronze stars, purple hearts, commendation medals I'd earned alongside him during our deployments. I settled into his old leather chair, the one that still smelled faintly of his aftershave, and pulled out my phone with trembling hands. I needed to call David. Not about Madison's comments, those words were already seared into my memory, but about everything I'd been ignoring for months. The way he'd stopped coming by for dinner unless he needed something. The way our conversations had shifted from family updates to business discussions. The way he'd started bringing up the warehouse expansion every time we talked, casually mentioning the numbers. 200,000 would get us started, Mom. Maybe 300 to do it right. I dialed his office number first. His assistant, a sweet girl named Jennifer who always remembered to ask about my health, answered on the second ring. Coastal Dreams Realty. This is Jennifer. Hi, Jennifer. It's Mrs. Walsh. Is David available? Oh, Mrs. Walsh. He's actually in a showing right now. Can I leave him a message? That was the first disappointment, though hardly surprising. David's schedule had become increasingly packed as the business grew. Just let him know I called, please. Nothing urgent. Of course. Oh, and Mrs. Walsh? He mentioned you might be coming to the warehouse viewing this afternoon? I have the address if you need it. I hadn't planned on going. The invitation had been more of an afterthought, David mentioning it only because Madison had pushed him to include me. If Mom's interested in seeing where her money's going, she'd said with that bright smile that never reached her eyes. Actually, yes. Could you give me those details? After hanging up, I tried David's cell phone, straight to voicemail. I left a message asking him to call me back when he had a moment to talk. Really talk, not just squeeze in a conversation. Between showings. Next, I called my sister Patricia in Phoenix. Pat had always been the more perceptive of the two of us, the one who could spot trouble before it knocked down your door. She'd visited last Christmas and had kept her observations about Madison to herself until we were alone in my kitchen, washing dishes. Patricia Walsh speaking. Pat, it's Eleanor. Ellie? Everything okay? You sound strange. I found myself telling her about the morning, about Madison's comments, about the years of financial support that had turned into monthly expectations. Pat listened without interrupting, making those little humming noises that meant she was processing every word. You know, she said finally, when I was there last Christmas, I noticed something. Madison never helped clear the table, not once. She'd sit there while you cleaned up, talking about her new Pilates instructor or that expensive handbag line she was considering investing in. And David? Well, David just let her. He's always been non-confrontational. There's non-confrontational. And then there's enabling, Ellie. Remember what Mom used to say? The child who screams loudest gets the most attention, but the quiet one might be the one who needs it most. After we hung up, I sat at James's desk for a long time, staring at the photo of us taken on our last wedding anniversary. We'd gone to dinner at that little seafood place on Shem Creek, the one where he'd proposed 40 years earlier. In the picture, we're holding hands across the table, both of us gray-haired and weathered but grinning like teenagers. What would you do, James? I whispered to the empty room. My phone rang. Hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe David had gotten my message. Maybe he'd sensed something was wrong and called immediately. But the caller ID showed a different number. Michael Chen, my financial advisor. Eleanor, I wanted to confirm tomorrow's. Transfer to Coastal Dreams? The usual $15,000? Michael had been handling my finances since James's death. We'd set up the automatic transfers when David first asked for help with his business, back when he was just getting started and needed first and last month's rent for a tiny office above the hardware store on King Street. Actually, Michael, I need to make some changes. Can you hold that transfer? Of course. Everything all right? I looked around the study, at the certificates and medals, at the photo albums filled with deployments and reunions, at the flag that had covered James's casket. Everything in this room represented service, sacrifice, commitment. Somehow, I'd let myself forget that love shouldn't require any of those things. Real love shows up. Real love doesn't need financial incentives. I need to reevaluate some arrangements, I told him. Can we schedule a meeting for tomorrow morning, early? After hanging up, I made one more call, to my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. Maria had lived next door for 15 years, and we'd become friends through early morning walks and shared garden tips. Her son Alex visited every Sunday for dinner, never missing a week, always bringing his 3 kids who called me Tia Eleanor. Maria. It's Eleanor. I hope I'm not bothering you. Never, mija. What's wrong? You sound upset." I found myself telling her about the smell comment, about Madison's suggestion that I sell my house. Maria's response was immediate and colorful in the way only a former nurse from Puerto Rico can manage. "That woman has the grace of a water buffalo." "But Eleanor, mi amor, why are you surprised? I've seen how she acts. Last month at the block party, she complained about the music being too loud while your grandson Tyler was dancing with the other children. She said it wasn't her aesthetic." I had no idea. "Of course you didn't. You're too busy taking care of everyone else. When was the last time David came by just to visit? Not for money, not for a meal, just to see how his mother is doing?" I couldn't remember. The realization hit me like ice water. "You know what Alex said the other day?" Maria continued. "He said he wished more families were like ours, close, supportive, present. He sees how David rushes through visits, always checking his phone. He sees how Madison looks at your house like it's beneath her. We all see it, Eleanor." After I hung up, I sat in James's chair and did something I hadn't done in months. I cried. Not the dignified tears of a Marine who's learned to compartmentalize, but the deep, gut-wrenching sobs of a mother who's slowly realizing that her son has been taking her for granted while his wife has been counting down the days until she can cash in. The sun was setting when my phone finally rang. David's name flashed on the screen. "Mom? Sorry, it's been crazy. Jennifer said you called." "Hi, sweetheart. Yes, I wanted to talk to you about a few things. Are you free for dinner tomorrow? Just you and me?" There was a pause. In the background, I could hear Madison's voice, sharp and questioning. "Tomorrow's tough. We have the warehouse appointment in the afternoon, and Madison's sister is coming for dinner. How about this weekend? We could all go to brunch?" All. Always all. When had it become impossible for my son to spend time alone with me? "Actually, David, I've decided not to come to the warehouse viewing." "Really?" But Madison thought, since you're helping us with the investment." Helping. As if my monthly transfers were a partnership rather than what they really were. A parent supporting an adult child who had never learned to say please or thank you. "I've got some other commitments tomorrow, but we definitely need to talk soon. It's important." "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine. We'll catch up soon." As I hung up, I realized the truth of what Patricia had said. Sometimes the quiet child is the one who needs the most attention. I'd been so busy being strong, being supportive, being the rock that everyone could lean on, that I'd forgotten to notice when they stopped leaning and started taking. The house felt different that evening. Maybe it was the way the light slanted through the windows, or maybe I was just seeing things more clearly. I walked through each room, touching the furniture James and I had chosen together, breathing in the scent that Madison had called the smell of old people. It wasn't musty or medicinal. It was lavender from the drawer sachets I'd been using since my mother taught me how to make them, vanilla from the candles James loved, and something else, something that smelled like home, like memory, like a life fully lived. Tomorrow I would make some decisions, but tonight I would sit in my kitchen and make myself a proper cup of tea, the way James and I used to do every evening. I would appreciate the quiet of my own home, without rushing to accommodate anyone else's schedule or expectations. The Marines had taught me many things, but perhaps I'd forgotten the most basic lesson. Sometimes retreat isn't surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. The next morning, I woke before dawn, a habit ingrained from 30 years of military reveille. The house was quiet, peaceful even. I made coffee the way James taught me. Dark and strong enough to wake the dead, he used to joke, and settled in the breakfast nook where I could watch the sun rise over the harbor. That's when I heard the knock. Not tentative or apologetic, but firm and confident. Military knocks always are. I opened the door to find Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Jackson, my former second-in-command, now the director of the Charleston Veteran Services Center. Sarah had been my protege in Afghanistan, the best logistics officer I'd ever trained. Now she stood on my porch in jeans and a VFW t-shirt, holding a box of pastries and wearing that familiar "I know you need backup" expression. "Coffee's still hot if you want some," I said, stepping aside. "When have I ever turned down your coffee, ma'am?" She followed me to the kitchen, setting the pastries on the counter. "I come bearing apology donuts from Glazed and Confused." Apology. Donuts? For not visiting sooner, Maria Rodriguez mentioned you might be having a rough patch. Something about a daughter-in-law with the manners of a drill sergeant who forgot her training? I had to laugh. Sarah had always been direct, a quality that had served her well in combat and apparently carried over into civilian life. "You didn't have to come by." Actually, I did. The center's been working on a new program, something I wanted to run by you anyway. But honestly, when Maria said someone made you question whether your own home was good enough for you, I figured it was time for a battle buddy check-in. As I poured her coffee, Sarah walked around my kitchen, touching the framed photos on the walls. Pictures of James and me at various military functions, snapshots of deployments, David as a child in camouflage for Halloween. She paused at one particular image, David's military academy graduation, where he'd decided last minute to pursue business school instead of commissioning as an officer. "Your son made his own path," she observed. "He did. And that's fine. Not everyone's cut out for military life. True. But there's a difference between choosing your own path and forgetting where the path started." She picked up a photo of Madison and David's wedding. "This her?" "Yes. Pretty. Expensive dress. They had a beautiful wedding." Sarah set down the photo and looked at me directly. "Eleanor, in combat, we watch each other's backs. We don't wait for permission to intervene when we see a soldier in trouble. Civilian life shouldn't be different." I told her everything then. About the smell comment, about the years of financial support, about the warehouse expansion and the automatic transfers, about David's decreasing availability and Madison's increasing demands. Sarah listened like the good officer she'd always been, without judgment but with growing anger in her eyes. "How much are we talking about?" she asked finally. "About 200,000 so far. 15,000 a month for the past year, irregular amounts before that." Sarah's whistle was low and appreciative. "That's more than most of our center's annual budget. And she complained about how your house smells?" It was just a comment. "Colonel?" The use of my old rank stopped me cold. If any Marine under my command was being disrespected by family they were supporting, what would you have told them? I knew the answer. James and I had counseled dozens of young Marines through family issues, financial abuse, emotional manipulation, the slow erosion of respect. We'd seen it all. "You remember Corporal Martinez?" I asked. Sarah nodded immediately. "The one whose sister kept borrowing money for her business ventures? We made him cut her off. Told him that enabling someone isn't helping them." "Exactly." Sarah reached across the table and took my hand. "Eleanor, you've spent your entire life serving others, in the Marines, in your community, with your family. But there's a line between service and surrender." The doorbell rang before I could respond. Through the front window, I could see a familiar car in my driveway, not David's usual BMW, but an older Honda Civic I recognized from the real estate office parking lot. David's newest junior agent, a young woman named Crystal who'd just gotten her license 3 months ago. "Mrs. Walsh? I'm so sorry to bother you." Crystal stood on my porch looking uncomfortable, clutching a manila folder. "Mr. David sent me to pick up some documents for the warehouse appointment this afternoon." I invited her in, though I wasn't sure what documents David could need. Sarah stood as we entered the kitchen. "Crystal, this is Lieutenant Colonel Jackson. She's visiting from the Veteran Services Center." "Oh, wow. Thank you for your service, ma'am." Crystal's response was immediate and genuine. "My brother's Army, currently deployed in Kuwait." "Which unit?" Sarah asked, and they spent a moment establishing military connections. It's something service members do automatically, finding the threads that connect their experiences. So, I said when they'd finished, what documents does David need? Crystal opened her folder, looking even more uncomfortable. Actually, Mrs. Walsh, he wanted me to ask about something else too. He said to mention the warehouse requires a deposit by Friday, and he wanted to confirm the transfer amount. Madison said it might need to be $20,000 this month instead of $15,000. The room went very quiet. Sarah's fingers tightened around her coffee mug. Did she now? I said mildly. I'm sorry. I feel weird even asking. Mr. David seemed really stressed about it, and Madison kept mentioning how understanding family helps family. And Crystal trailed off, her cheeks reddening. Sarah spoke up. Crystal, how long have you been working for David? 3 months. He gave me a chance when other agencies wouldn't. Said his mother had taught him about helping people who needed opportunities. And in those 3 months, how often have you seen David with his mother? Crystal's answer was quiet. Never, ma'am. He talks about her a lot, especially when he's explaining our client approach, how personal connections matter in real estate. But I've never actually seen them together. Something painful twisted in my chest. Sarah caught my eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Crystal, I said gently, when you go back to the office, please tell David I need to speak with him directly about the transfer. Not through messages, not through Madison. Just him and me. Of course, Mrs. Walsh. After Crystal left, Sarah refilled our coffee cups and we sat in silence for several minutes. You know what the hardest lesson was in Afghanistan? Sarah said, finally. Learning that sometimes you can't save everyone. Sometimes you have to make tactical decisions that hurt in the moment but serve the greater mission. I looked out the window at my garden, where James and I had planted roses that still bloomed every summer despite my amateur care. I thought about Tyler, my grandson, who drew pictures of us together and saved them for his weekly visits. I thought about David as a little boy, helping James build birdhouses in the garage, so careful and patient with each measurement. The warehouse appointment is at 3, I said. David doesn't know I've canceled the transfer yet. Want backup? The offer was pure Sarah, direct, supportive, no questions asked. But this was a mission I needed to complete alone. No, but thank you. For the coffee, for listening, for being the kind of friend who shows up without being asked. Sarah stood, gathering her jacket. That's what we do, Eleanor. We show up. It's not complicated, it's not expensive, and it doesn't require spreadsheets or business plans. We just show up. After she left, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, thinking about showing up, about the difference between being present and merely transferring funds, about love that flows in one direction until it becomes an expectation rather than a gift. I picked up my phone and dialed Michael Chen, my financial advisor. Eleanor, good morning. I've got the transfer on hold like you requested. Michael, I want to set up a different kind of account. Something for my grandson Tyler. A college fund, maybe a trust that he can access when he's older. Can we use some of the money that would have gone to David's business? Absolutely. We can structure it however you'd like. As I hung up, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not even disappointment. Just clarity. The Marines had taught me to adapt to changing conditions, to recognize when a strategy wasn't working and modify accordingly. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop enabling someone to take you for granted. Sometimes showing up means setting boundaries. I had a warehouse appointment to skip and a son to have a serious conversation with. First, though, I was going to finish my coffee in my own kitchen, breathing in the scent of home that some people mistake for age, but I recognize as memory and life, and the simple accumulation of days well lived. By Thursday afternoon, 3 days after the smell incident, as I'd started calling it in my mind, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. It wasn't just a series of coincidences or unfortunate moments. It was a tapestry of small betrayals woven so gradually I hadn't noticed until someone pointed out the finished design. I'd woken that morning to find my cell phone filled with missed calls and text messages. 7 missed calls from David, 3 from Madison, all coming in after midnight. I'd silenced my phone around 10 p.m., a habit James and I had maintained to ensure uninterrupted sleep. The military had taught us both that rest was crucial for clear thinking. The text messages painted a clear picture. David. Mom, please call me. Madison's upset about something Crystal said. Madison. Eleanor, there's been a miscommunication. Crystal shouldn't have mentioned the warehouse details to you directly. David again. We really need to talk. The deposit deadline is tomorrow. Madison. David's having a panic attack about the business. This warehouse deal is crucial for our future. That last text made me pause. Our future. Not the business's future. Not David's professional growth. Our future. As if I were already written out of the equation, my role reduced to that of a silent investor whose only value was monetary. I made myself breakfast before responding to anyone. Eggs Benedict, the way James used to make it on Sunday mornings. As I whipped the hollandaise sauce, my mind drifted to other patterns I'd missed. 3 months ago, David had arrived for dinner already fed, claiming Madison had made amazing salmon at home, but he didn't want to hurt my feelings. I'd spent hours preparing his favorite beef Wellington, the dish he'd requested specifically for his birthday since he was 12. 2 months ago, Tyler's overnight stay had been canceled last minute because Madison planned a family spa weekend. When Tyler had protested, wanting to show me his science project, Madison had said something about old houses having too many germs for a 7-year-old with delicate constitutions. Last month, David had mentioned their need for a new car. Madison's BMW was practically prehistoric at 3 years old. I'd offered to help with the down payment, and the car had been purchased within the week. They'd never thought to show it to me. I was still processing these memories when my doorbell rang. Not the tentative ring of a delivery person or the familiar pattern of a neighbor. This was insistent, almost aggressive. Madison stood on my porch, alone, looking like she'd stepped off the cover of Southern Living magazine. Designer jeans, perfectly styled hair, makeup that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. Eleanor, we need to clear the air. I think there's been a huge misunderstanding. I invited her in because that's what my mother had taught me. Courtesy first, even when you sense danger. I'd used the same principle in military negotiations. Keep calm, maintain protocols, but stay alert. Coffee, I offered. No, thank you. I really can't stay long. I have a Pure Barre class at noon. She settled into my living room chair, James's chair, without asking. Something about that presumption rankled me more than anything else she'd done. David's beside himself, she began. He keeps saying he might have disappointed you somehow. I told him that's ridiculous. You're his mother, and mothers always forgive their children. There it was. The assumption that forgiveness was automatic, that mothers were bottomless wells of understanding and financial support. Madison, let me ask you something. When was the last time you and David visited just to see how I was doing? Not for dinner? Not for business? Not because you needed something? Her perfect smile faltered just slightly. We've been so busy with the expansion. Real estate doesn't follow regular hours, you know. And with Tyler's activities... Tyler's activities? I kept my voice neutral, though my military training was screaming danger signals. Like what? Oh, you know, soccer, piano lessons, that gifted program Madison is applying to. We're trying to prepare him for the best opportunities. I thought about Tyler's last visit, when he'd spent 2 hours helping me weed the garden, chattering. About his teacher, Mrs. Peterson, and how she let him feed the class hamster. No mention of soccer or piano lessons. Madison, be honest with me. Are you happy with our family dynamic? The question clearly surprised her. Her carefully constructed mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something underneath. Not malice. Exactly, but calculation. Of course I'm happy. Everyone's happy. That's why this misunderstanding about the warehouse funding needs to be resolved quickly. David's worked so hard, and we're so close to really making it big. The doorbell rang, again saving me from responding. This time it was Maria Rodriguez from next door, holding a covered dish. Eleanor, I made too much arroz con pollo. I thought you might like some. She caught sight of Madison and her expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Oh, hello, Madison. I didn't realize you were visiting. Just a quick conversation about business, Madison said, standing. I was actually just leaving. After Madison left, Maria set down the dish and took my hands. Mija, that girl has been talking to the other neighbors, asking questions about your house, about your finances, about how much we think it might be worth. What? Last week she stopped me during my evening walk, started chatting about how sad it was that you were all alone in this big house, how it would be so much better for you to downsize. She even had some pamphlets from senior living communities. My chest tightened. She was canvassing the neighbors? Not just canvassing. She told the Hendersons that you were considering selling, asked if they knew any good moving companies for elderly clients. She told Mrs. Patterson that you were worried about maintaining the property as you got older. I sank into the couch, pieces clicking into place like a military operations map. Madison wasn't just thoughtless or entitled. She was actively working angles, setting the stage for something bigger than just a warehouse expansion. There's more, Maria continued gently. Yesterday, I saw her at the public library. She was researching property values, talking to that real estate agent from Century 21 about comps in our neighborhood. After Maria left, I sat in the kitchen I'd been supposedly too old and smelly to properly maintain, and made a list. Military habit. When facing a complex operation, break it down into components. Financial contributions. $200,000 plus over 5 years. Increasing monthly property interest. Madison researching house values, discussing sale with neighbors' family. Isolation. Tyler's canceled visits. David's limited time alone with me professional boundaries. Using business junior staff to deliver personal messages, public perception. Planting stories with neighbors about my decline, emotional manipulation. Using David's stress and Tyler's needs as leverage. The Marines had taught me to recognize reconnaissance when I saw it. Madison wasn't making random comments or thoughtless mistakes. She was gathering intelligence, building a case, preparing the battlefield. As if summoned by my thoughts, my phone rang. David. Mom, I'm so sorry about earlier. Can we please meet this afternoon? Just us. No Madison, no business talk. I miss talking to you. For a moment, my heart softened. This was my son, the boy who'd cried when his father deployed, who'd insisted on wearing my dog tags to his high school graduation. I'd like that, David. 2 o'clock? The Magnolia Grill? Perfect. And Mom? I'm sorry if Madison came across wrongfully. She's just stressed about the business. We've put everything into this expansion. After hanging up, I walked through my house with new eyes. Madison had been right about one thing. The place felt different lately, but it wasn't the smell of age or decline. It was the smell of a life being slowly dismantled by someone who saw my home, my savings, and my relationship with my son as assets to be managed rather than treasures to be respected. I stopped in front of the mantel, where photos spanning 30 years of military service stood alongside family snapshots. My change of command ceremony when I took over the battalion in Kabul. James receiving his Bronze Star in Iraq. David learning to ride a bike in this very driveway, James running beside him. Something Sarah had said echoed in my mind. There's a difference between service and surrender. I'd spent my career serving my country, my community, my family. But somewhere along the way, That service had transformed into something else for Madison: an entitlement, a resource to be exploited, a weakness to be leveraged. At 1:45, I drove downtown to meet my son. As I parallel parked near the restaurant, I noticed Madison's car in the Coffee Bean parking lot across the street. She was sitting inside, phone pressed to her ear, watching the entrance to the Magnolia Grill. The pattern was complete. Even a moment alone with my son required surveillance, management, control. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, military bearing never really leaves you, and walked into the restaurant. David was already there, fidgeting with his water glass, looking more like the boy I'd raised than the businessman he'd become. "Hi, Mom. Thanks for meeting me." "Always, sweetheart. Always." As I sat down, I realized something important. Love doesn't require patterns of control or strategic reconnaissance. Real love shows up consistently, honestly, without calculation or agenda. And if someone needs to orchestrate that, to manage and manipulate every interaction to ensure their desired outcome, then it's not love they're protecting, it's something else entirely. The Magnolia Grill was crowded with the typical Thursday lunch rush, but David had chosen a quiet corner booth, the kind of table where serious conversations happened. He'd ordered my usual sweet tea before I arrived, a small gesture that reminded me of the son who used to remember every detail that mattered to the people he loved. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot since Crystal came back from your house yesterday, about everything that's been happening." I watched his hands fidget with the menu, the same nervous habit he'd had since childhood when he needed to confess something. "What have you concluded?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. I think I've been taking advantage of your generosity, and I think Madison might have been pushing me to do it without me realizing." The admission hung between us like morning fog over the Charleston harbor. Part of me wanted to immediately reassure him, to smoothen over his discomfort the way I'd done 1,000 times before. But my military training had taught me the value of strategic silence. Sometimes you let people fill the quiet with truth. Yesterday, when I told Madison that you wanted to talk to me directly about the transfer, she got angry. Really angry. She said you were trying to control our business, that you were using money to manipulate our family dynamic. David's voice dropped lower. But then I started thinking about how often we actually see you versus how often we ask for something. He looked up at me then, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't noticed in months. Clarity, maybe, or recognition. I can't remember the last time I just came over without needing anything, without bringing Tyler because he needed to stay somewhere while we showed houses, without Madison suggesting we stop by because it would mean a lot to you after you'd helped with something financial. The server appeared to take our orders. I selected the shrimp and grits, a dish that had always been James's favorite here. David ordered, but barely looked at the menu. "David," I said when we were alone again, "I need to ask you something directly. Do you remember what Madison said about my house smelling like old people?" He winced. "She mentioned it to me later. Said it slipped out, that she didn't mean it the way it sounded. How did she mean it?" That's what I couldn't figure out. When I pressed her on it, she said she was worried about your health, that sometimes elderly people don't notice their own. He stopped, the words clearly tasting wrong even as he said them. "David." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Your father and I spent years counseling Marines through family conflicts. We saw every pattern in the book. What Madison did, commenting on my house smell, researching property values, talking to neighbors about my fictional plans to sell, suggesting Tyler's allergies to old houses. These aren't random criticisms. They're a campaign." His hand tensed under mine. "A campaign for what?" "To establish doubt about my competency, to plant seeds with neighbors and family that I'm declining, that this house is too much for me. Standard groundwork for someone who wants to present you with evidence, that I need to make major life changes." Mom, that's a serious accusation. It's a serious situation. Yesterday, Maria showed me pamphlets Madison left with neighbors about senior living communities. She's been telling people I'm considering selling. David, when did you become someone who doesn't notice his wife actively undermining his mother? Food arrived, giving us both a moment to process. I watched my son push rice around his plate, his expression cycling through denial, consideration, and slowly dawning realization. Last month, he said finally, when you helped us with the BMW down payment, Madison immediately started talking about the warehouse expansion. She had spreadsheets, projections, timelines. She said we needed to maximize our momentum with your support. Did she specify how much momentum that would require? She estimated we'd need about $500,000 total to really secure our future. The warehouse was just the beginning. There were plans for a second office location, maybe buying out our main competitor. I set down my fork. David, I have about $800,000 in liquid assets, plus the house. That's my entire retirement, built over 30 years of military service. His face went pale. I thought the warehouse was a one-time investment. When someone you love asks for help, it's natural to give it. But when someone systematically positions you as a funding source while simultaneously undermining your dignity and autonomy, that's different. That's not a family crisis. It's a business strategy. David pushed his plate away entirely. I'm going to be sick. Sweetheart, look at me. I waited until his eyes met mine. I've made a decision about the warehouse funding. His whole body tensed. I understand, Mom. I understand if you want to stop helping us. That's not my decision. My decision is different, and it affects more than just your business expansion. I pulled out the folder I'd brought from home, containing documents I'd spent the morning preparing with Michael Chen, my financial advisor. I am formally canceling all automatic transfers to Coastal Dreams Realty, effective immediately. The warehouse deal will not happen with my funding, and I will not be providing monthly operational capital anymore. David's hands trembled slightly as he processed this. Okay, that's fair. We overstepped. I overstepped. I'm not finished. I'm also setting up a trust for Tyler, not controlled by you or Madison, but professionally managed. It will fund his education and provide an inheritance when he turns 30. Mom, that's incredibly generous. And I'm putting this house in a life estate arrangement. I will live here until I die, at which point it will transfer to Tyler, not to you. This ensures no one can pressure me to sell or move based on manufactured concerns about my competency. David was quiet for a long moment. You've thought this through completely. I'm a Marine, David. We plan for contingencies. We protect strategic assets. And we don't surrender to enemy advances. Enemy? His voice was small. I hope not. But someone who treats their relationship with you as a pathway to my resources, who actively undermines my dignity while accepting my financial support, who researches my property values while telling me I smell like an old person. If that's not someone working against my interests, I don't know what is. I slid another document across the table. This is a letter I've written to Madison, to be delivered by registered mail. It outlines these changes, explains my reasoning, and establishes clear boundaries going forward. David opened the letter, his eyes scanning quickly. As he read, his expression shifted from shock to something that might have been respect. You're not cutting us out completely, he said slowly. I'm not punishing you, David. I'm protecting myself and ensuring Tyler's future. If you and Madison want a relationship with me based on actual affection and respect, that option remains open. If you choose to focus solely on what you can no longer get from me financially, that will tell me everything I need to know. He closed the letter and looked at me directly. I think I've been someone I don't recognize for a while now. Someone who let Madison's ambitions become my priorities, who let financial goals replace family connections. Someone who forgot that my mother was a Marine colonel who didn't survive 3 combat deployments by being anyone's financial pawn. David, I will always be your mother. I will always love you. But loving someone doesn't mean funding their dreams while ignoring red flags in their relationships. It means caring enough to set boundaries when they're needed. We sat in silence for several minutes, the restaurant noise fading into background blur. When David finally spoke, his voice was different, clearer, more like the sun I'd raised. What happens now? Now you go home and explain these changes to Madison. You watch her reaction carefully. You listen to what she says about me, about money, about our family, and you decide who you want to be. And if she doesn't react well, then you'll have important information about the woman you married, and you'll need to make some decisions about your future that go far beyond real estate expansion. As we left the restaurant, I noticed Madison's car was no longer across the street. David walked me to my car, and for the first time in months, he hugged me without it feeling like an obligation. I'm sorry, Mom, for all of it. I know you are. Now the question is what you're going to do about it. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The clarity that comes after a difficult but necessary mission. I'd made a tactical decision based on intelligence gathered, patterns recognized, and strategic objectives defined. My retirement was protected, Tyler's future was secured, and the boundaries were drawn. Now it was David's turn to choose his battlefield. I didn't have to wait long for Madison's response. At exactly 6:17 p.m., 3 hours after my lunch with David, my doorbell rang with the aggressive persistence of someone who wasn't planning to leave quietly. Madison stood on my porch, no longer the perfectly composed Southern belle. Her hair was disheveled, her designer blouse wrinkled, and her eyes blazed with a fury she'd finally stopped trying to conceal. "How dare you?" she spat, clutching the registered letter in her manicured hand. "How dare you turn my husband against me, manipulate our business, and then have the audacity to put everything in writing like some kind of military dictator?" I stepped aside to let her in, noting how David's Prius wasn't in my driveway. This was Madison's solo mission, and that told me everything I needed to know about how their conversation had gone. "Please, sit down. Would you like some tea?" "I don't want your tea, Eleanor. I want an explanation. 15 months of supporting us, and now you just cut us off? Because your feelings got hurt by an offhand comment?" I settled into James's chair, while Madison paced my living room like a caged animal. Her southern charm had evaporated, leaving something raw and calculating beneath. "Madison, let's be clear about what happened. This isn't about hurt feelings. This is about a pattern of behavior that shows how you view our relationship." "Oh, here we go. The wise Marine veteran showing us all how it's done." Her voice dripped with sarcasm. "You know what I think? I think you're jealous." "Jealous?" "That David has someone else in his life who matters. Someone who shares his dreams, who pushes him to succeed. You can't stand that he's building something without you." I reached for the folder I'd prepared, pulling out printouts I'd made that afternoon. "Madison, you've contacted 6 real estate agents in the past month inquiring about property values in this neighborhood. You've spoken to 3 senior living communities requesting brochures. You've told at least 7 neighbors that I'm considering selling because I'm getting too frail to maintain this property." Her face flushed, but she didn't deny it. "David and I are concerned about you. We're trying to help. By researching my assets while telling my grandson I live in a germy old house, by canceling his overnight visits, by ensuring David never spends time alone with me. Oh, please. You act like we've been conspiring against you. David comes from a generation that's focused on success, on building wealth. Of course, we're focused on maximizing opportunities." "Maximizing opportunities? Is that what you call researching my financial accounts with neighbors? Having coffee with my bank teller?" Her mask slipped completely. How did you? I have friends in this community, Madison. People who've known me for 20 years. When you start asking questions about someone's finances in a town like Charleston, word gets around. She stopped pacing and faced me directly, dropping all pretense. Fine. Yes, I've been planning ahead. David's brilliant, but he lacks ambition. He's content with small successes, with being just another real estate agent in a saturated market. I see his potential, Eleanor. I'm trying to help him achieve it. At my expense? With your resources. You're sitting on nearly $1 million in assets while your son struggles to expand his business. What kind of mother hoards wealth while her child needs help? The audacity stole my breath for a moment. The kind of mother who spent 30 years in combat zones so her son could grow up in a free country. The kind of mother who's already given $200,000 to that son without ever asking for appreciation, let alone respect. Madison waved her hand dismissively. Money you're not even using. What do you need it for? You live alone. You're retired, you barely leave this house. I need it for my future care, for Tyler's education, for maintaining my independence as long as possible, for emergencies, for the same reasons any retiree needs financial security. Tyler will inherit everything anyway when you die. The bluntness of it hit like a physical blow. I'd known this, was her mindset, but hearing it spoken so matter-of-factly was different. So, in your calculation, I'm just a delay, an obstacle between you and a profitable inheritance timeline? Madison's expression hardened. Don't be dramatic. I'm being practical. David deserves to succeed now while he's young enough to enjoy it. You've had your whole life to accumulate wealth. It's his turn. And what about his turn to visit his mother? His turn to call just to check in? His turn to bring Tyler over without ulterior motives? Everything isn't about you, Eleanor. The world doesn't revolve around an old woman in a big house. That's when I knew with absolute certainty that I'd made the right decision. This wasn't temporary stress or misunderstanding. This was who Madison really was when she stopped pretending. You're right, I said calmly. The world doesn't revolve around me, but my money does, and my house does, and my relationship with my son and grandson does. I pulled out another document. This is a copy of the life estate I filed today. This house will never be yours, Madison. Not while I'm alive, and not after I die. Tyler will inherit it when he turns 30. Until then, it's protected from anyone trying to manipulate or pressure me into selling. Her face contorted with rage. You spiteful old woman. You're doing this to punish me for speaking the truth. You do smell like old people. This house does feel like a dying person lives here. And David deserves better than a mother who holds her love hostage with money. I stood then, my military bearings snapping into place. Get out of my house. What? Get out. Now. You are no longer welcome here. You can't ban me from visiting. David can visit whenever he wants. You cannot. You've shown me exactly who you are, Madison. You're someone who sees my age as weakness, my generosity as entitlement, and my home as a real estate asset. That's not family. That's vulture behavior. She grabbed her purse, yanking it aggressively. This isn't over. David will never choose you over me. I'm not asking him to choose. I'm asking him to recognize there's a difference. As she stormed to the door, she turned back with one final shot. You know what? I hope you do die alone in this moldy old house. Because when you do, we'll sell it anyway. Tyler will do whatever his father tells him to do. After she slammed the door, I sat in the quiet of my living room and did something I should have done months ago. I called my lawyer. Not for more legal protection, but to document what had just happened. In the military, we learned that clear communication prevents misunderstandings and protects everyone involved. I also called David. It went to voicemail. David, it's Mom. Madison was here. She's no longer welcome in my home due to threats and inappropriate behavior. You and Tyler are always welcome. This doesn't affect our relationship, but it does affect what I'll tolerate from anyone. We'll talk when you're ready. Then I made myself dinner. James's famous spaghetti carbonara, and ate it in my kitchen that supposedly smelled like old people. Funny thing about that smell? Tonight, all I noticed was the lavender from my drawer sachets, the vanilla candle burning on the windowsill, and the faint aroma of the roses blooming outside my window. The house didn't smell like death or decline. It smelled like a life lived fully, independently, and on my own terms. And for the first time in months, that felt exactly right. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes Charleston feel like the most perfect place on earth. I was in my garden, deadheading the roses, a therapeutic activity James had taught me during our first years of marriage, when David's car pulled into my driveway. He sat there for several minutes before getting out, engine running, clearly, wrestling with something internal. When he finally emerged, Tyler bounded out of the passenger side like a golden retriever puppy, backpack bouncing, immediately running to inspect the bird feeder we'd hung together months ago. "It's empty, Grandma Eleanor. The birds ate all the seeds." "That means they liked our selection, sweetheart. Want to help me refill it?" David approached slowly, hands in his pockets. "Mom, we need to talk about yesterday." I gestured to the garden. Bench. "Tyler, can you count how many different birds come to the feeder while your dad and I chat?" As Tyler settled into his mission with the concentration only 7-year-olds possess, David sat beside me. His eyes were red-rimmed, his usually neat appearance disheveled. "Madison and I had a long conversation last night. Actually, that's not accurate. We had a fight. Then I slept in the guest room. Then we had another fight this morning." I waited, letting him find his words. One lesson from combat leadership. Sometimes the best support you can offer is silence. She told me about yesterday, about coming here. Her version was... He ran a hand through his hair. "Well, it was different from yours. But I realized something, Mom. The details don't matter as much as the pattern." "What pattern did you see?" "Everything you laid out at lunch yesterday. I spent last night looking at our bank statements, our text messages, our calendar. In the last year, the only times we've seen you were when we needed something. Even Tyler's visits were scheduled around our business needs." A blue jay landed at the feeder, and Tyler whispered, "One," with barely contained excitement. "Madison kept saying you were trying to control us with money, that you were manipulating me with guilt. But as I was reviewing everything, I realized she was describing herself, not you." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. "Look at this text thread from 2 weeks ago. Madison. Remember to mention the warehouse deposit to your mom at dinner. Maybe let Tyler sit on her lap. She loves that." Then this one. "Don't let her get sidetracked talking about her garden. Keep the conversation focused on the business." The evidence was painful to see laid out so clearly. "David, no, let me finish, because it gets worse." He scrolled further. "Here's her researching senior living costs. Here's where she calculated how much we'd need for a down payment on that warehouse if you sold your house. Here's where she found out Tyler would inherit your property and started planning how to access those funds early. A cardinal joined the blue jay, and Tyler's 2 carried across the garden. When I confronted her about all this, she didn't deny it. She said I was being naive, that successful people always think ahead, that family wealth should be leveraged for maximum generational benefit." David's voice cracked. "She said you were selfish for not seeing it that way." "And what do you think?" He was quiet for a long moment, watching Tyler count birds with intense focus. "I think I married someone who sees relationships as transactions, who views my mother as a retirement account that's paying out too slowly, who complained about this house smelling like old people while planning to inherit it." 3 more birds arrived, 2 finches and a mourning dove. Tyler was practically vibrating with the effort to keep his count accurate. "David, I need you to understand something. I'm not angry at you. I'm disappointed, yes, but not angry. You got swept up in someone else's vision and lost your way. That's human. What matters now is what you do next. He nodded slowly. I know. And I think I know what I need to do, which is, I need to tell you I'm sorry. Really sorry. Not just for the financial stuff, but for the distance. For letting Tyler think he couldn't spend the night because our house was too germy. For never just calling to see how you're doing. For letting Madison turn you into a funding source instead of a grandmother. Tyler suddenly stood up triumphant. 7 birds, Grandma! 7 different kinds! That's wonderful, sweetheart. Did you notice the woodpecker? The red one? Yes. He was sneaky. David smiled despite everything, a real smile that reminded me of the boy who used to chase fireflies in this same yard. Mom, I want to make this right, but I need to handle my marriage first. Madison's gone to her sister's in Columbia for the weekend. We're supposed to have a serious conversation when she gets back about whether we can work through this. Work through what, exactly? Whether she can accept that you're my mother, not a business opportunity. Whether she can respect our family relationships without calculating their monetary value. Whether she can understand that love doesn't increase your net worth. A squirrel attempted to raid the bird feeder, and Tyler laughed as it comically failed to reach the seeds. David, can I share something with you? A lesson from Afghanistan that applies here? Always. The difference between winning and losing often comes down to knowing who your real allies are. In combat, you learn quickly that some people will risk everything for you, while others only stick around when conditions are favorable. Madison has shown you, repeatedly, which category she falls into. Tyler came running over. Daddy, can we put more seeds? The birds are fighting now. As we refilled the feeder together, 3 generations working on a simple task, something shifted in the air. Not resolution exactly, but possibility. The possibility that clarity, even when painful, can be a gift. Mom, David said as Tyler scattered extra seeds on the ground for the birds. I want you to know that whatever happens with Madison, this is where I want to be on Friday mornings. Here, with you. Counting birds with my son. I hugged him then, really hugged him, the way I hadn't since before Madison had started counting my assets. Take my word on this, honey. The mess is just fog burning off in the morning sun. What's underneath, that's what lasts. As they left, Tyler ran back for one more hug. Grandma Eleanor, next week can we count squirrels too? As many as you want, sweetheart. Watching them drive away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not the naive hope that everything would magically fix itself, but the earned hope that comes from watching someone choose clarity over comfort. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is forcing them to see the truth, even when, especially when, it's messy and painful and changes everything. The afternoon sun slanted through my kitchen windows as I made a fresh pot of coffee. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Thank you for being patient with me. And thank you for being stronger than I was. I didn't respond immediately. Some messages deserve to settle, to be absorbed rather than quickly answered. Instead, I took my coffee to the front porch and counted 7 different kinds of birds myself, marveling at how much life continues, regardless of our human dramas. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but today, finally, I felt like my son had chosen to see clearly, and that, I realized, was worth more than any business deal or inheritance plan could ever be. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen on a warm April morning, preparing Sunday dinner. The house buzzed with a familiar energy I hadn't felt in years. Not the anxious anticipation of someone needing something, but the comfortable chaos of family gathering without agenda. Grandma Eleanor, the peonies are blooming. Tyler burst. Through the back door, dirt on his knees and joy in his eyes. Can we cut some for the table? Of course, sweetheart. Let's pick the ones by the fence. They're the prettiest. David emerged from the garage, carrying the toolbox we'd been using to repair the old picnic table. His sleeves were rolled up, sawdust on his jeans, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. "Mom? I think one more coat of stain and she'll be good as new." He paused, wiping his hands. "Remember when Dad and I built this table? I must have been 12. You were 10. And you insisted on using the hammer even though it was bigger than your hand." Tyler looked up from examining the peonies. "Was Daddy? Little like me? Just like you," I said, ruffling his hair. Same stubborn determination, same way of sticking his tongue out when he concentrates on something hard. The changes had happened gradually after that Friday morning bird counting session. David had spent 2 weeks in serious conversations with Madison, trying to reconcile their different visions of family and wealth. Those conversations had led to a separation trial, then to divorce papers filed in January. Madison had fought it initially, demanding her fair share of everything, including future inheritance possibilities. But with clear legal boundaries already in place and David's newfound clarity about what mattered most, she'd eventually accepted a settlement and moved to Atlanta to be closer to her sister. Tyler adapted better than anyone expected. Sometimes, he'd told me one evening while we were planting new vegetables in the garden, Mommy and Daddy were happier when they weren't trying to be married anymore. The wisdom of 7-year-olds never ceased to surprise me. David's business had weathered the storm. Without the pressure to constantly expand, he'd refocused on what he did best, helping families find homes. The warehouse deal fell through, but a smaller office space in a more affordable part of town had emerged as the perfect solution. His revenues were steadier, if less aggressive, and he came home at reasonable hours now. "You know what I learned?" he'd told me one February evening while we were watching Tyler build a snow fort in the backyard, a rare Charleston snow day. "Success doesn't always look like what magazines tell you it should look like." As I arranged Tyler's freshly cut peonies in James's favorite vase, I heard Sarah Jackson's familiar laugh from the driveway. She'd become a regular Sunday dinner guest, along with Maria Rodriguez and her family from next door. "Eleanor, your roses are absolutely shameless this year," Sarah called, entering through the front door without knocking, a privilege earned through months of genuine friendship. "I brought wine and that bread from the farmer's market you love." "And Alex brought his famous tres leches cake," Maria added, following behind with her son and grandchildren. "Though I still say your peach cobbler is superior." These Sunday dinners had evolved organically. David had suggested the first one, nervous about Tyler having enough social interaction post-divorce. But what started as a structured playdate had transformed into something more essential, a real family dinner, expanded beyond blood relations to include chosen family. "Dinner in 30 minutes, I announced to the gathering crowd. "Tyler, can you show the younger kids how to set the table properly? Military precision, remember?" As I watched him distribute napkins with serious concentration, explaining to Maria's 5-year-old granddaughter exactly how far each plate should be from the edge, I felt James's presence more strongly than I had in years. Not as pain or loss, but as warmth. The satisfaction of seeing life continue in patterns he'd helped establish. David appeared at my elbow. "Need help with anything, Mom?" "Actually, yes. Can you carve the roast? Your father's knife is in the 3rd drawer." As he moved to get the knife, he paused. "Mom, can I tell you something?" "Always." I was talking to my therapist about money and family last week. She said something that stuck with me. She said, "Your mother didn't give you money to control you. She gave it because she could, and you needed it. The control came when someone else decided how that generosity should work." I watched him test the knife's edge against his thumb, a gesture so like his father's it made my chest tight. "I spent so many years trying to be successful for the wrong reasons," he continued. "Trying to prove something to Madison, to impress people who didn't really matter. I forgot that the success Dad and you modeled was much quieter. It was about showing up, being present, choosing people over possessions. Sarah appeared in the doorway. Everything okay in here? Perfect, I replied. Just discussing philosophy while the roast rests. Save the deep thoughts for dessert, she teased. Tyler's organizing a peony arranging contest and apparently everyone's required to participate. Later, as we all gathered around the old picnic table, fresh stains still slightly tacky, I looked at the faces surrounding me. David, animated as he told Alex about a house he'd helped a young couple buy that week. Tyler, perched on Sarah's lap as she helped him cut his meat. Maria's grandchildren, arguing good-naturedly about who got the crispiest potatoes. This wasn't the family I'd imagined a year ago. There was no Madison counting assets, no pressure to expand or achieve or impress. There was just Sunday dinner, the simple ritual of gathering around food and conversation, the sacred ordinary moments that actually comprise a life well lived. Grandma Eleanor, Tyler piped up during a lull in conversation. Next week, can we have a bird counting contest and Sunday dinner? Maybe the birds can come inside for dessert? The table erupted in laughter. David caught my eye over the chaos, and we shared a look of perfect understanding. Later, as the last guests were leaving, and David was helping Tyler gather his overnight bag, another new tradition, Tyler wrapped his arms around my waist. Grandma, do you know what I like best about Sunday dinners? What's that, sweetheart? Everybody shows up, and nobody leaves until we're all done. After they'd gone, I washed the dishes slowly, savoring the quiet restoration of my kitchen. The house didn't smell like old people anymore, not because anything had changed about my detergent or lavender sachets, but because I no longer let other people's perceptions define my space. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and settled in. James's chair, pulling out my journal, something I'd started after the divorce was finalized. Tonight's entry was simple. April 15th, Sunday dinner number 23. Tyler counted 8 birds, including one he swears was a hummingbird but was probably just a large bee. David carved the roast perfectly, using his father's technique. Sarah brought. Her mother's bread recipe and Maria's cake was, as Tyler declared, dangerously delicious. Sometimes I think about what Madison wanted from all this. She wanted wealth, security, social status. She got a settlement that will set her up comfortably in Atlanta. But what she never understood was that wealth accumulates in more ways than one. Today, I was rich in conversation, laughter, and the simple pleasure of watching my grandson teach smaller children how to properly fold a napkin. The Marines taught me about securing strategic positions. I secured my finances, my home, and my independence. But the greater victory was discovering that love doesn't require defense fortifications. Real love shows up consistently, helps with dishes, notices when you're tired, and counts birds on Friday mornings. Tyler asked tonight if I miss the old days, when Madison was still married to Daddy. I told him no, that sometimes you have to let go of something heavy to hold on to something precious. He nodded with that 7-year-old wisdom and said, like when I had to give up my broken toy car to get the new bike. Exactly like that, sweetheart. Exactly like that. As I closed the journal, my phone buzzed with a text from David. Thanks for today, Mom. See you Friday morning for bird counting. Tyler says he's bringing his binoculars this time. I smiled, setting the phone aside. Tomorrow held its own promise. Maria had invited me to join her walking group. Sarah wanted to discuss the Veteran Services Center's new funding proposal. And I had a lunch date with my sister Patricia, who was flying in from Phoenix just to check on me. The house settled into its evening rhythms, creaking slightly as the day's warmth faded. But tonight, the sounds felt companionable rather than lonely. Tonight, my home was full of the echoes of laughter and conversation, the plans made and promises kept. In the military, we learned that the best defense is often a good offense, but I'd discovered something more important. The best life is usually a good ordinary one, filled with Sunday dinners and bird counting and grandchildren who think flowers should attend dessert. And that, I realized as I turned off the lights and headed to bed, was worth more than all the warehouses in Charleston. 1 year later, I stood at the Charleston Veteran Services Center podium, facing a room full of retired military personnel and their families. Sarah Jackson had asked me to speak at their monthly financial planning workshop, but the talk had evolved into something much more personal, a discussion about recognizing when support becomes enablement and when love becomes manipulation. Wisty. Your hand if you've financially supported an adult child or family member in the last 5 years, I began. Nearly every hand in the room went up. Now keep your hand up if that support came with strings attached, not from you, but from them. About half the hands stayed raised. Finally, keep it up if you've ever questioned whether that support was truly helping them, or just enabling patterns that weren't serving anyone. Only a handful of hands remained, but I could see the recognition in every face. These stories were more common than any of us like to admit. I'm Eleanor Walsh, I continued. Retired Marine Colonel, served 30 years, survived 3 combat tours, and almost didn't survive my daughter-in-law's subtle campaign to gain control of my assets. The laughter was knowing, tinged with shared experience. I told them about Madison's old people smell comment, about the systematic undermining of my independence, about the warehouse expansion that would have consumed half my retirement. But I also told them about what happened after, about David choosing clarity over comfort, about Tyler counting birds on Friday mornings, about Sunday dinners that filled my house with genuine warmth rather than calculated visits. In the military, we're trained to complete missions. Sometimes, as parents and grandparents, we continue that mindset in ways that don't serve us. We think our mission is to solve every problem, fund every dream, sacrifice everything for our children's success. I paused, seeing nods of recognition throughout the audience. But here's what I learned. There's a crucial difference between supporting someone and enabling them. Support empowers people to reach their potential. Enabling prevents them from developing their own strength. A woman in the back row raised her hand. My son keeps asking for business loans. I want to help, but he's never paid back anything he's borrowed. How do I know when to stop? When the requests increase but the gratitude decreases, I responded. When your relationship starts feeling more like a funding source than a family connection. When they start managing your perception of your own circumstances instead of appreciating what you can provide. After the workshop, I was approached by 3 different veterans with variations of the same story. Sons and daughters who had transformed, family gatherings into business meetings, in-laws who researched property values or calculated inheritance timelines, adult children who had become strangers except when they needed something. Later that afternoon, I met with David and Tyler at our favorite coffee shop downtown. David was showing me photos from his recent real estate success. 3 house sales in 1 month, all to veteran families he'd connected with through the services center. Look at this one, he said, swiping to a picture of a young couple holding keys in front of a modest colonial. Marine Sergeant, 2 tours in Iraq. Used his VA loan and found exactly what they needed. No pressure, no aggressive sales tactics, just honest help. Tyler looked up from his homework. Daddy helps people find homes now, not just sell houses. The distinction was subtle, but profound. David had discovered that rushing toward the biggest commission often meant missing the most meaningful transactions. Speaking of helping people, David said, pulling out a thin envelope, I need to give you something. Inside was a check for exactly $15,000. David, Mom, let me finish. This is 1 month's payment on what I owe you. Not the warehouse money. I know that was a gift. But all those other times before Madison, when you helped with the office rent or the car payments or just covered, are gaps. I kept track. I looked at the check, then at my son's earnest face. "You don't owe me anything." "I disagree. I owe you money, yes, but more importantly, I owe you acknowledgement. You supported my business for years without recognition. That's not right, regardless of what Madison did later." Tyler piped up. "Plus, Daddy says when someone helps you, you say thank you and mean it." "He's right." David smiled at his son. "My therapist calls it gratitude with action. Saying thanks is important, but showing thanks matters more." Over the following months, David did pay me back. Not all at once, but in steady payments that aligned with his business cash flow. More importantly, our relationship transformed into something based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. But the real lessons came from unexpected places. Maria Rodriguez's son Alex started joining our Friday birdwatching sessions, bringing his 3 kids for what he called cross-generational wisdom sharing. Sarah Jackson introduced me to other retired officers who were navigating similar family dynamics, creating an informal support network she dubbed the Battle Buddy Finance Club. Tyler, in his 8-year-old wisdom, had perhaps the clearest insight of all. During one Sunday dinner, as the adults discussed family loyalty and financial boundaries, he cut through the complexity with simple truth. Sometimes the best way to help someone is to let them figure it out themselves. Like when I was learning to ride my bike without training wheels. The room fell silent, everyone processing this observation. "From the mouths of babes," Sarah murmured. "Actually," I said, "from the minds of people who haven't yet learned to complicate things unnecessarily." A year after canceling the warehouse funding, I received an unexpected email from Madison's sister, Jennifer. Madison had started a business in Atlanta, event planning for nonprofit organizations. She was moderately successful and, according to Jennifer, had learned some valuable lessons about the difference between strategic planning and manipulative scheming. I responded briefly, wishing her well and declining her invitation for reconciliation. Some relationships serve their purpose in teaching us what we don't want, and that's enough. The most profound change was personal. I'd spent so many years being strong for others, for my Marines, for James during his illness, for David during his struggles, that I'd forgotten how to accept strength from others. Now, when Sarah insisted on helping with yard work, or when Maria brought extra dinner because it's easier to cook for 10 than for 8, I learned to say yes rather than politely refusing. Independence, I realized, isn't about doing everything alone. It's about having the wisdom to know when and how to accept help, and the strength to refuse help that comes with invisible strings. On a warm evening in May, as I sat on my front porch watching Tyler and his friends catch fireflies in my yard, my phone rang. An unknown number, but something prompted me to answer. "Mrs. Walsh? This is Crystal from David's office. We met a while back?" "Of course, Crystal. How can I help you?" "I hope it's okay to call. It's just, I'm having an issue with my own family. My parents keep asking me to co-sign on a business loan, and after what I observed with you and Mr. David, I'm having second thoughts about family and money mixing. I wondered if you might have advice?" I smiled, recognizing the conversation that was about to unfold. "Crystal, do you have time for coffee tomorrow? I have a feeling this is a discussion worth having face-to-face." As I hung up, I realized something important. My experience with Madison hadn't just taught me about my own family dynamics. It had equipped me to help others navigate similar challenges. Every difficult lesson had value beyond the personal, rippling outward to benefit people I might never have imagined. The evening deepened, and Tyler came running up the porch steps, hands cupped carefully around a glowing firefly. "Grandma Eleanor, look! I caught the biggest one!" "That's wonderful, sweetheart. What will you do with it?" He considered this seriously. "I'll watch it glow for a minute, then let it go. Daddy says some things are more beautiful when they're free." I hugged him tight, breathing in the scent of summer and childhood and the profound wisdom that comes from people who know what matters most. Perhaps that was the ultimate lesson, knowing when to hold on, when to let go, and when to simply witness the beauty of something living its own truth. As the fireflies rose into the darkening sky, I felt a deep satisfaction, not because everything had turned out perfectly, but because I had learned to recognize the difference between manipulation and love, between enabling and supporting, between the transactions that diminish us and the relationships that help us grow. And in the end, that clarity was worth more than any real estate investment could ever be. 2 years after the warehouse incident, I received an invitation that surprised me more than anything that had happened. With Madison, the Charleston Real Estate Association wanted to honor David as their Ethical Agent of the Year. The ceremony was held at the historic Francis Marion Hotel, in the same ballroom where James and I had attended so many military functions decades ago. I arrived early, wearing the navy dress I'd worn to David's law school graduation, back when he'd still considered following his father's footsteps into military law before choosing his own path. The ballroom hummed with conversation as agents, brokers, and their families gathered. "Grandma Eleanor!" Tyler's voice cut through the crowd. He ran to me in his miniature suit, tie slightly askew. "Daddy's winning a trophy!" "Not a trophy, buddy," David corrected, appearing behind his son. "An award for doing business the right way." As we took our seats, I noticed something remarkable. Our table wasn't filled with the power players David would have gravitated toward 2 years ago. Instead, we sat with young agents David was mentoring, veteran families he'd helped find homes, and office staff he valued rather than just managed. The presenter, a silver-haired woman who'd run her brokerage for 30 years, told the story of David's transformation. How he'd shifted from high-pressure sales tactics to building genuine relationships. How he'd created a program helping divorced parents find suitable co-parenting housing. How he'd partnered with the Veteran Services Center to ensure military families received honest, pressure-free guidance. What distinguishes David Walsh, she concluded, is his understanding that success isn't measured solely in commissions, but in the foundations we build and the relationships we nurture. When David accepted the award, his speech was characteristically humble. "This honor belongs to many people, but especially to my mother, Eleanor Walsh. A few years ago, she taught me the most valuable lesson of my career, that real wealth comes from integrity, not just income." He looked directly at me. "Mom showed me that supporting someone isn't the same as enabling them, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set boundaries." These lessons transformed not just my business, but my life. The applause was warm and genuine, but what moved me most was Tyler's whispered comment. "Daddy's talking about when Mommy tried to take all your money, right?" "Smart boy," I whispered back. After the ceremony, as we celebrated at a modest restaurant, Tyler had chosen specifically for their world's best mac and cheese. My phone buzzed with a text from an unexpected source, Madison. "Saw the article about David's award. Proud of his success. Hope you're well." I showed the message to David. He read it without expression, then handed back my phone. "Your choice how to respond, Mom. But don't feel obligated." I simply replied, "Thank you. Wishing you well in Atlanta." Sometimes closure comes not through dramatic confrontations, but through quiet acknowledgement that people find their own paths. Madison had needed to see relationships as investments, and I had needed to learn the difference between generosity and enabling. Both lessons served their purpose. 3 months later, I stood in the garden of my house, the same house Madison had urged me to sell, that Tyler would inherit at 30. But now it hosted something new. Monthly workshops for military families. Navigating financial challenges. The idea had germinated from my talk at the Veteran Services Center. Sarah Jackson and I had developed a program combining financial literacy with relationship dynamics, teaching people to recognize when family support becomes unhealthy dependency. Our first workshop drew 12 veteran families, Our current session had a waiting list of 40. Today, we're discussing the difference between helping and enabling. I addressed the group gathered in my living room. Let's start with a question that might feel uncomfortable. Has anyone here ever financially supported a family member and later regretted it? Hands went up slowly, accompanied by nervous laughter. I've been there, I continued, and I've learned that regret often comes not from the act of giving, but from the patterns we unintentionally create. After the workshop, as participants shared coffee and resources, Tyler helped clean up with the efficiency of a child who'd attended enough gatherings to know the routine. Grandma, why do grown-ups make money so complicated? That's an excellent question, sweetheart. What do you think? He considered this with the seriousness he gave all philosophical discussions. I think they forget that money is just for buying things you need and maybe some things you want, but it's not for controlling people. From the mouths of babes, indeed. That evening, as the sun set over Charleston Harbor, I sat on my porch with David and Tyler, watching the evening unfold. These quiet moments had become our new tradition. No phones, no business discussions, just presence. Mom, David said, I've been thinking about something. Would you consider being a guest speaker at Tyler's school career day? Not to talk about the military, but about standing up for yourself, about knowing your worth. What prompted that? His teacher mentioned they're trying to include more diverse perspectives on success. And Tyler's been telling his classmates about how his grandma is the toughest and smartest person ever. Tyler nodded emphatically. You survived wars and survived mommy trying to take your money. That's like super soldier level. I laughed, hugging him close. I'd be honored to speak at career day. As summer deepened into fall, our life settled into new rhythms that felt both ordinary and profound. Friday morning bird counts became legendary in our neighborhood, with other grandparents joining what Tyler had dubbed the Wisdom and Wings Club. Sunday dinners expanded to include rotating guests, veterans in transition, young couples David was helping, neighbors who'd become chosen family. The warehouse David had wanted to buy was eventually converted into a community center. Sometimes, I'd drive past it, imagining the different path we might have taken if I hadn't found the strength to say no. That building now housed programs for at-risk youth, financial literacy courses, and support groups for families navigating difficult transitions. On a crisp October morning, exactly 2 years after canceling the warehouse funding, I received an email that made me laugh out loud. Crystal, the young agent who'd delivered that fateful message about increasing the monthly transfer, had been accepted to law school. She wanted to specialize in elder law, protecting seniors from financial abuse. Your example changed my perspective. Her email read, I want to help other families navigate these challenges before they reach crisis points. That afternoon, as I pruned roses in preparation for winter, I reflected on how one moment of clarity, recognizing the smell of manipulation masquerading as familial concern, had rippled outward in ways I never could have predicted. The back door opened, and David emerged with 2 cups of coffee. Thought you might need a break, he said, settling beside me on the garden bench. Perfect timing, as always. We sat in comfortable silence, watching a hawk circle overhead. Mom, can I tell you something? Always. I think about that lunch conversation. Sometimes, when you laid everything out so clearly about Madison's patterns, I was angry at first, not at you, but at myself for not seeing it sooner. We see what we're ready to see, sweetheart. Maybe. But I've learned something important from all this. Military families have a saying, right? Leave no one behind. But sometimes, the most important person to protect is yourself. I squeezed his hand. That's very true. And the beautiful thing is, when you do protect yourself with wisdom and love, you often save others too. As autumn settled over Charleston, painting the live oaks in subtle gold, I began writing my story. Not for publication, but for Tyler. Someday, when he faced his own challenges with family, money, and relationships, he'd have his grandmother's perspective to consider. But I also shared parts of it here, with you, because these lessons transcend individual families. Whether it's recognizing financial manipulation, setting healthy boundaries, or understanding the difference between support and enablement, these challenges touch many lives. If my story resonated with you, I encourage you to reflect on your own family dynamics. Are your acts of generosity empowering your loved ones, or enabling patterns that don't serve anyone? Are your relationships based on mutual respect or conditional support? More importantly, I invite you to subscribe to this channel for more stories about navigating life's complex relationships with wisdom and grace. Hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and join our community of people choosing authenticity over appeasement, boundaries over manipulation, and real love over false obligations. Leave a comment below sharing your own experiences with family financial dynamics. Your story might help someone else recognize patterns in their own life. As I close this chapter of my story, I'm sitting in my kitchen, the one that supposedly smells like old people, preparing Sunday dinner for 12. The house is filled with laughter, the garden blooms despite my amateur care, and Tyler is teaching his friends how to count birds through the window. Madison was right about one thing. Change was necessary. But it wasn't my house that needed freshening, or my independence that needed managing. It was our family's understanding of what truly matters that needed renovation. And now, 2 years later, as I watch 3 generations gather around my table, sharing food, stories, and honest conversation, I know we've built something worth much more than any real estate investment. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, may you choose wisdom over wealth, presence over presence, and clarity over compromise. God bless, and Semper Fi.